They call it the Facebook revolution, which is really not what it was. To me, yes, it was the youth revolution in the fact that it was the largest generation of young people, and they had no upward mobility, and their lives were getting worse, not better. But in the same time, that social networking was there as an alternative to the mainstream media, which the mainstream media isn't just like ours, which has corporate interests. There, it's all censored by the government. So it contained no information. It's all actually propaganda and lies, none of which anyone believed, but there was no way to actually know where information.
Get the rest of it. Yeah.
So Facebook allowed them, and Twitter allowed them to network and connect.
So this is the beginning of the Arab Spring.
Right, this is the beginning of the Arab Spring, and to me, I had just done 2 projects. My significant project was The Pessimist, where you had Sweep and Chicken and Sissy, where like the woman is sweeping her footsteps in the desert,
yeah.
and Chicken, where the oppressor keeps coming in to slap the hand, and the victimized keeps bringing their hand back to be slapped, and it really was. I was tired of actually making comments about the West versus East as an artist. I wanted to speak about the East, the so-called East, in its own dilemma, like how we allow ourselves to be occupied and oppressed by our own. And when the woman is sweeping her own footsteps in the desert, it's like she doesn't even need anybody to police her anymore. She's so trained from such a young age that she polices herself, even when nobody's looking.
Yeah.
She's caught in her own self-censorship.
It's been internalized.
Yeah, she's caught up in her own self-censorship, and that was what we had as a dilemma as a people. It's like, who cares? You're not going to expect the West or the United States or Israel to actually give you yours. We don't even take our own, right? We don't take our own rights. We don't stand up to our own leaders. We don't stand up to our own parents. We don't stand up to our own communities. We don't stand up to our own need for justice and freedom. Why should we expect the West to give us anything?
Are we so sensitized to terrorism at this point, and somebody trying to do something funny and somebody maybe capturing some information to be used against us later, that we shouldn't let anyone do something out of the ordinary in a public space? And so she really became the guerrilla dancer. She really became a sort of a protest movement just by her dancing in these spaces. And I collage these together in a way that would maybe have an impact, that would sort of throw these spaces at you one after another, and maybe have it look interesting, because she continues to move in a very fluid way through these spaces. You don't see her stop moving anywhere, and it looks like she's just doing a continuous choreographed dance in these spaces, but the spaces continue to change. So I collage these together in a way that when you see enough of them, you maybe start to question, what was it like to film there, for example, in a military graveyard? Is this going to be a problem? And how are they able to even get in there to do this? And that's kind of what I wanted to have emerge as you watch these collaged spaces together.
John, his whole goal in the beginning was getting us, his students, to remember to always have our camera with us, and always have film in the camera, and always have not just film, but film in the camera and ready to shoot. That you couldn't come to his class if you didn't have a camera that was on you and it was out of your bag and the film was in there. He'd always have his, like, that's the first thing he'd look for.
Thing. That's great. He was ahead of his time.
And now I find myself as an artist. Photography has always been my journal. I always shoot my memories. I shoot my notes. I shoot my whether it's video or stills. I always shoot in the same way I journal, but I even shoot more. But now I find myself as a human being wanting less of that around me, because I'm afraid that I'm not experiencing enough emotionally and mentally. And I feel like I need to put that away so that I can teach my brain to continue the exercise of concentration.
There's a piece, Medium Grind, which is the bullets in the coffee grinder. And I was talking about the spectacle of war, about how not only is war turned into a spectacle in the media, but this idea of bullets being that if a bullet is used properly, it's meant to take a life. They could say, well, I'm using it for target practice. Well, practice for what? You grind this into the spectacle where it becomes like a movie. And
So when you open the drawer, what do you see in there?
so in the drawer, you see basically the media having turned war into a spectacle.
And when you say spectacle, what do you mean by that word?
Turning it into something that's entertainment, something that's very compelling to watch, something that is formally beautiful, even, with icons and logos and colors and special effects and interesting people to talk about it and maps and statistics that look devastating and bombs going off and looks like fireworks, and this is what the media does.
I look at those bullets, and I have a work from my Negatives Capable Hands series where it was the first project I did that I removed the nationalistic identity of being Palestinian, Iraqi, or some hybrid identity from my work. And I decided to just use hands and then operate with symbols and the green line, because the green line isn't always like the safety zone. It isn't always you think of the green line in Palestine, you think of like the 1948 line, the 1967 line, the line's always changing, but the green zone is the zone of safety in Iraq for the Americans, right? And so that line is constantly changing and moving, and that idea of the border is changing. And I have these like toy guns on a green line, just like it's like clothes being hung out to dry, and a little, like it's like a little hand picking at them, and it's kind of that domestication of the everydayness of guns in our lives.
When I was a child, we thought of the fact that cities and towns were kind of blown into an environment, blown into the forest. In other words, we would take down all the trees, and there we'd put a town, or there we'd eventually put a city. And now it seems like nature is a place you go to like it's in a reserve. Like I'm going to go to this nature preserve or this forest, and I'm going to go camp there for a little bit with my car or something, or all of my high-tech camping equipment. And it's surrounded by a gate or a fence that says, yes, you can be here, and maybe you even have to pay money to use the campground or whatever. And surrounding that is private property. So we sort of have these little preserve areas that are state property surrounded by private property. So everything is completely delineated now, and nature itself has become a property, a surrounded property, which is really what I'm speaking about when I have got this landscape inside of a flower pot. Because that's really what's happened these days, is that we go to nature now like it's this place that it's like an amusement park or something, and we're going to go to the nature amusement park, and then we're going to come back to our real reality, which is our city or our stage that we've created for ourselves.
And the brother versus the brother, where you have the stacked screens, and they're both figures. They have the race car driver who's spinning the donuts,
and the girl twirling in the dress.
She's twirling with the black silk, and I'm thinking about that, as you come to age in the Middle East, right? Like as a woman or a male, men are hyper masculinized, and they are reared to be taking chances, just like anywhere else in the world, take chances, be a man, and a female there in particular becomes more veiled and more hidden and more domesticized as she becomes older. But they're both trapped, right? That's why they're both going in circles. They're both trapped by this like expectation of society, and they both have that yearning to be free. And especially for me, because I was observing so many of my men, my male friends who were about my age, and if they were living somewhere else, like say the United States, that idea of upward mobility is limitless. Like that ceiling, it doesn't exist. It's the idea that you just keep building and you gain more power. And that project was made before the Arab Spring, or during the time of the beginning of the Arab Spring. So it was really capturing the frustration of the male youth, right? Who found that because of nepotisms, because of who your family may know or not know, that you could only reach a certain kind of level, or maybe a Palestinian male who's 25 or 30 who has to cross a checkpoint, and an 18-year-old Israeli who carries a gun and has control. They're like they hit each other in this moment of encounter, and one has power and one does not. So what does one do when it doesn't have any power? They go home, they may abuse their wife, they may abuse their body, they may spin out in some kind of way. And so it was a way of looking at both of these these both of those gender relationships of both being traps and freedoms.